My sister used to steal all my flings, until after she got married, I slept with her husband and she was outraged. Before continuing the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss more stories and leave your like on the video. I used to think I was overreacting. Maybe I was just sensitive, too needy, too dramatic. That's what they said anyway. I must have heard it 100 times growing up. Don't be jealous. It's just a silly crush. Or, your sister can't help it if people like her more. The worst one? It's not her fault you don't shine the same way. That one stuck. From the outside, we looked like the perfect little family. 2 daughters, 2 years apart, one prettier than the other, though no one ever said that out loud. They didn't need to. The way people looked at her, the way boys tripped over themselves to impress her, how our parents fawned over her every small achievement like it was a miracle. And me? I was always there, in the corner of the frame, blurry and expendable. I remember the first time it happened. I was in 8th grade. There was a boy who used to save me a seat at lunch every day. He'd always wait for me by the lockers, carrying 2 chocolate milks from the vending machine, one for him, one for me. I thought that meant something, until my sister showed up one afternoon to pick me up from school. She smiled at him. That was it. The next day, he didn't wait for me. He waited for her. It wasn't the only time. Every time I got close to someone, she appeared. With that hair that always fell in the right place, that voice that curved around words like velvet, that laugh that made people lean closer just to catch it again. And every time, they left. For her. She never asked for permission, never even acknowledged what she was doing. It was always dressed up as a joke, or brushed off as coincidence. Once, when I finally snapped and accused her of stealing someone I liked, she blinked at me like I was speaking another language. "You mean that guy who kept staring at me while you pretended he liked you?" she said, like it was a mercy to clarify things. Our mother laughed. "Honey, boys don't know what they want at that age. Don't take it so personally." But I did. I took it all personally. Every betrayal, every eye that drifted past me to land on her, every time someone told me how lucky I was to have such a beautiful, charming sister. I didn't feel lucky. I felt invisible, like I was the blank canvas she got to paint her image on. She was never cruel in the traditional sense. She didn't call me names, or trip me in the hallway, or steal my clothes without asking. No, she was worse. She was perfect, sweet, accomplished, always smiling, always the center of every room she walked into. And that's what made it impossible to hate her out loud. So I hated her quietly. I learned how to shrink myself to make space for her. I stopped telling anyone when I liked someone. I avoided eye contact with guys at school. I stopped dressing up when I knew we'd be in the same place. Why bother? I told myself it was temporary. That one day I'd get out. That one day I'd find someone, anyone, who saw me before they saw her. But by the time I was old enough to leave, the damage had already been done. Every time someone paid attention to me, a voice inside whispered, "Only until she shows up." And they always did. Our parents never noticed. Or maybe they did, and just didn't care. She made them proud. I made them tired. They'd say things like, "You're the smart one," like it was a consolation prize, like intelligence was something to fall back on when beauty failed. And in their eyes, mine had already failed. I remember once, at a family barbecue, one of our uncles came up to me and said, "Your sister's going to be a heartbreaker, but you'll be the one who marries well." I was 16. I didn't even know what that meant, but it felt like another label being stamped on my forehead. Second place. The thing is, I didn't want what she had because she had it. I wanted it because it should have been mine. Or at least I thought so. Until it kept happening over and over again, like a pattern I couldn't unlearn. And eventually I stopped trying to compete. I just let her win. But the wounds didn't close. They hardened. They layered over each other like scar tissue. Every time someone called me her sister, I smiled. But inside I was folding up another piece of myself and tucking it somewhere deep. Somewhere even I couldn't reach. People say you grow out of that kind of thing. That once you get older, those teenage insecurities fade. They don't. They just evolve. They become quieter, more patient, more cunning. You stop crying in your room and start pretending you don't care. You stop hoping people will choose you and start pretending you'd rather be alone. It's safer. But deep down, there's still a girl who wanted to be looked at first, who wanted to feel like she was enough, just as she was, not someone's second choice, not someone's fallback plan, not the girl they almost noticed before the real prize walked in. She got married 2 years ago. Big wedding, perfect dress, tears during the vows. Everyone said she looked like a princess. I stood at the edge of the reception, a glass of flat champagne in my hand, watching her dance with the man who swore she was the love of his life. And I wondered, for the 100th time, what it would feel like to be her. I still don't know, but I do know what it feels like when the world finally turns, even just a little. When, for once, she doesn't win. When the look in her eyes isn't pride or confidence, but betrayal. That day's coming. And when it does, I won't blink. It got worse before it got better. Not in the dramatic way you'd expect, like a screaming match or some final, fiery confrontation. No, it was quieter than that. Slower. Like dripping water eroding stone. By the time I turned 18, I had completely given up trying to catch anyone's eye. I knew how it would end. If they looked at me, it was only until she arrived. I became good at pretending I didn't notice when they shifted their bodies toward her in conversation, or when they suddenly laughed louder at jokes she barely told. I perfected the art of stepping back without being seen doing it. Even at home, it felt like I was being measured against a standard I could never meet. She had a new boyfriend every few months, each more impressive than the last. Athletes, future doctors. One guy even drove all the way from another state just to surprise her with roses and tickets to some concert she didn't even like. Our mother cried when she told her about it. She said, "You're going to have such a beautiful life." I remember that line because I was sitting right there on the couch. She didn't even look in my direction when she said it. I got good at disappearing. Not physically. I still went to school, still came home, still showed up for holidays and birthdays. But emotionally, mentally, I became a ghost. It was easier to fade out than to fight. I focused on academics, not because I loved it, but because no one competed with me there. No one tried to steal my A on a chemistry test. No one clapped louder for her calculus score. But even that wasn't safe for long. She started dating a guy from the robotics team, the only boy I had ever let myself talk to outside of class. I never told anyone I liked him, but I think she could tell. It was in the way I lingered when he spoke, the way I brushed my hand over my mouth to hide a smile when he made a dumb pun. She sniffed it out like blood in the water. 2 weeks later, they were holding hands in front of my locker. I wish I could say that was the moment I snapped, but it wasn't. I just got quieter. People started saying I was shy. Some said I was cold. One teacher even pulled me aside and asked if I was depressed. I wasn't. Not clinically. I was just tired. Tired of being reminded, every single day, that I wasn't her. That I never would be. The worst part was, I started to believe there was something fundamentally wrong with me. That maybe I gave off a weird energy. That maybe I wasn't meant to be chosen. I didn't have the right face, the right voice, the right anything. I spent hours in front of the mirror trying to rearrange myself into someone more like her, tilting my head the way she did, parting my hair differently, even practicing her expressions. It never worked. I looked like I was wearing someone else's face. There was this one night, my last year of high school. We were invited to a party at a guy's house from her class. I didn't want to go, but our parents insisted. "It'll be good for you," they said, which meant, "You need to be more like her." I wore a dress that I thought made me look older. I did my makeup carefully. Not too much, not too little. I told myself I'd try, just this once. Smile more. Be open. At the party, I stayed near the drink table, sipping something too sweet and too warm. And for a brief, flickering moment, a guy came up and talked to me. He asked me about school, about my plans. He even laughed at something I said. Actually laughed, not that polite kind. My heart started to do that stupid flutter thing I'd trained it not to do anymore. Then she walked in. She didn't even look at me at first. She was scanning the room like she always did, calculating who noticed her, who wanted her, who didn't matter. When her eyes landed on us, she smiled that smile she saves for when she's about to take something. 10 minutes later, they were dancing in the living room. Close. Her arms wrapped around his neck like they'd known each other for years. He didn't even glance back. I left without saying goodbye. That night, I stared at the ceiling until sunrise. Not crying, not raging, just existing, like a statue left out in the rain. I think that was the moment I realized something important. It wasn't about the boys. Not really. It wasn't even about her. Not entirely. It was about me and what I had allowed myself to become. How I had internalized every comparison, every dismissal, every tiny moment of being overlooked. I had built my identity around being less, and once that seed is planted, it grows in everything you do. You don't speak up in class. You don't apply to things you might deserve. You don't flirt. You don't believe compliments. You don't expect anything, and you tell yourself that's strength. But really, it's fear. Fear that if you reach for something, someone better will come along and take it. Someone like her. So I stayed alone. Not out of pride, out of self-defense. I avoided crushes, avoided eye contact, avoided any situation where I might feel like I had a chance, because deep down, I was already preparing myself to lose it. And when you live like that long enough, it becomes your truth. But somewhere under all that silence, something else was taking shape. A resolve, a slow burning anger. Not loud, not wild, but steady, focused. I didn't know it yet, but it would become the one thing I could call mine. It would become the reason I'd stop losing. And eventually, it would become the reason she'd beg me to stop. A independence built from ashes never feels clean. It's not triumphant like the movies make it seem. It's quiet, lonely, heavy in a way that doesn't go away just because you move to a different zip code. I applied to schools far enough that my parents couldn't visit unannounced, but not so far that it seemed like I was running away, even though I was. I remember how my mother barely looked up when I told her I got in. She just said, "That's nice, sweetheart. Your sister's thinking of taking a year off to model. Isn't that exciting?" I nodded like I hadn't been holding my breath all week for some kind of reaction. Maybe a hug, maybe pride, anything. She didn't even ask what I planned to study. My father gave me a short, distracted smile, said something like, "Make sure you keep your GPA up," and went back to watching the news. I carried my acceptance letter back to my room and sat on the bed for a long time. Not sad, just numb. I left 2 months later with a single suitcase and no goodbye from my sister. The dorm was small and plain, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out at the back of a dining hall. It smelled like dust and some kind of industrial floor cleaner. But it was mine, my space. No shared closets, no heels scattered across the floor, no perfume clouds lingering in the air, just silence and a door I could lock. For the first time, no one knew who I was related to. No one looked at me and asked, "Are you two twins?" Or, "Wow, you're both so different. What's that like?" I didn't have to smile and pretend I didn't hear the real question under it. How does it feel to be the other one? I was just me, or whatever was left of me. Classes started fast. I chose early morning lectures on purpose. The kinds that weed out the students who only showed up for campus parties and Instagram photos. I didn't care about all that. I wasn't there to make friends. I wasn't there to find myself. I was there to work, to escape, to build something they couldn't take from me. At first, I kept to myself. I went to class. I came back to my room. I studied. I ate alone in the campus cafe. Headphones in, head down. People tried to talk to me. I'd give polite half smiles, short answers, nothing to invite more. And especially, not to men. There were a few who tried. The guy who sat 2 rows behind me in economics. The one from the dining hall who always gave me an extra scoop of pasta. The lab partner who asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime after midterms. I declined all of them. Not because they were rude or strange or unkind, but because I didn't believe them. I didn't trust the way people's attention turned on and off. I didn't trust smiles that came too easily. I didn't trust that, if they met my sister, they wouldn't just evaporate. So I shut it all down. What I did trust was structure. I made color-coded schedules. I took on a work-study job shelving books in the library and picked up tutoring shifts in the evenings. I applied for internships, even unpaid ones. Anything to keep moving forward. Every dollar I earned, I saved. Every paper I turned in, I double-checked. I wasn't going to give anyone a reason to look at me and say, "She only got here because she's pretty," because no one ever had. I became efficient, focused, invisible in the way that finally gave me peace. But still, there were nights. Nights when the silence stretched too far, and I'd catch myself scrolling through social media, watching videos of her laughing at rooftop bars or posing with some new boyfriend I'd never heard of. My parents would be in the background sometimes, smiling, holding champagne. They looked younger, lighter, like I had taken all the weight with me. Sometimes I wondered if they even noticed I was gone. One night I watched a video she posted of her and her friends singing in a car, arms flailing out the windows. She looked wild and carefree and perfect like always. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, and for a second, a small, weak second, I missed her. Not the girl she became, but the one we used to be when we were kids, before the world started comparing us like display items in a store window. There was a time, I think, when we used to play together without keeping score. A time when we were just sisters. But that version of us was gone. I closed the app and opened a blank document. typed the title of my next essay, and kept writing until I couldn't see the screen through the blur in my eyes. No one saw those moments. No one knew. To everyone around me, I was thriving. So responsible, they'd say. So independent. They didn't know that independence, for me, was survival. It wasn't brave, it was necessary. I didn't know how to lean on anyone anymore. I didn't want to owe anyone anything. I had learned over and over again that people only support you until something better comes along. I wouldn't be left behind again, so I kept my distance. I worked, I read, I studied, I perfected the version of myself that didn't need anyone, and for a while, that was enough. But something happens when you isolate for too long. Your defenses get too high, your walls too thick, and when someone finally does get through, even just a little, it shakes everything. I didn't know yet that someone would, but they were coming. There was something different about the way he looked at me. Not the way guys looked when they were about to ask for my number, or when they were pretending to be interested in my opinion just long enough to see if I'd smile. No. His eyes didn't scan, didn't linger too long. They stayed, focused, curious. He was new to campus. I first noticed him during a lecture I wasn't even supposed to be in. The professor was out sick, and they brought him in to cover. Everyone around me was whispering. He was young, clearly not much older than us. Too polished to be a student, too calm to be trying to prove anything. Just there, confident in that quiet way I never trusted. I sat near the back, as always, notebook open, pen in hand, pretending I wasn't already analyzing every word he said. Not because I was interested, but because I couldn't help it. That's how I protected myself, study people before they could study me. He asked a question halfway through the class. One of those open-ended ones meant to start discussion. The room went still. I don't know why I raised my hand. I never did. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I wanted to see if his attention would change once I spoke. It didn't. He smiled, genuinely, and said, "That's an interesting way of putting it. Not condescending, not performative. Just present. Like he was actually listening. Like I'd said something worth hearing. I forgot about it by the time I left the room. At least, I told myself I did. But 2 days later, when I walked into the library for my tutoring shift, he was sitting at one of the tables near the philosophy section, reading, glasses low on his nose, a black pen twirling between his fingers. He looked up, and that same steady gaze landed on me. He nodded, just once. And then, he smiled. It was too small to mean anything, too short to hold on to. So I didn't. Except he kept showing up. Always alone, always reading, sometimes in the cafe line, sometimes near the admin building, once even outside during a campus event neither of us seemed interested in. We never spoke more than a greeting. A hi, maybe a polite comment about the weather. That was it. Until the third time I passed him at the cafe and he asked if I'd tried the lemon muffins. I said no. He said, "You're not missing anything." It was stupid, insignificant, but something about the way he said it made me laugh. Not politely, not performatively, a real laugh. Quick, short, but mine. He raised an eyebrow, and for a split second, I thought he was going to push. Ask my name, offer his, but he didn't. He just took his coffee and said, "See you around." I watched him walk out and realized my heart was beating faster than it should have been. I told myself it was nothing, that he was just friendly, polite, that I was just out of practice when it came to human connection. But the next time I saw him, during a guest lecture, he sat in the back, near me. Not directly next to, but close enough. And halfway through, he leaned over and whispered a sarcastic comment about the speaker's slide transitions. I smiled without meaning to. That's how it started. Slowly, in snippets and silences, I began to look forward to those accidental encounters that weren't really accidental anymore. The way he never tried to impress me, never looked at me like I was a puzzle to solve or a challenge to conquer. Just a person, an equal. I hated how much I started to think about him. It made me feel exposed, weak, stupid, and yet I couldn't help it. The way he listened when I spoke, the way he referenced things I'd said weeks earlier, like they mattered, the way he never once brought up appearance or asked if I had plans that weekend. It wasn't flirtation, it was attention, respectful, focused attention, and it terrified me. Every time I felt myself leaning in, I pulled back harder. I kept conversations short. I avoided eye contact when things got too warm. I lied and said I was busy when he suggested grabbing a coffee between classes. I wasn't ready. I didn't trust it, him, or myself, because part of me, buried deep under layers of rationality and scars, wanted to believe it could be real, that someone could choose me without needing her in the room to remind them of their options, but the louder part knew better. That part remembered the chocolate milk boy, the robotics teammate, the boy at the party. Every moment where I'd let my guard down and watched someone else smile at her like I didn't exist. I wasn't about to do that again. Still, the day he waited for me after a lecture, leaning against the railing with his hands in his pockets, I didn't walk the other way. He looked at me and said, "You always disappear so fast. I have places to be," I replied, too quickly, already defensive. "I figured," he said, "but if you ever want to not be somewhere, at least for a few minutes, I'd like to hear more of what you think." I didn't answer, just looked at him, waiting for the catch, the punchline, the shift in his expression that would tell me he didn't mean it, but it didn't come. So I nodded, not a yes, just not a no. He smiled and didn't say anything else. He just walked beside me down the steps. No touch, no assumption, just quiet company. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, and that was somehow even scarier. It started with coffee. One cup turned into two into a ritual. Always the same time, same place. Sometimes we talked about classes, sometimes about books. Once we ended up arguing for almost an hour about whether or not moral neutrality actually existed. I left feeling irritated, but more alive than I had in years. He never flirted, at least not in the way I was used to. There were no compliments about how I looked, no casual touches, no suggestive glances. He made me feel smart, capable, like my opinions mattered. And slowly I began to let down parts of myself I thought were permanently locked. We didn't call them dates, not officially. But I started to notice how he'd wait for me after his lectures, how he'd tilt his head slightly when I was talking, as if he was memorizing what I said, how he'd choose the table near the window, always pulling out the chair across from his like it was reserved for me. I tried not to think about what it meant. Still, I found myself dressing differently. Softer sweaters, subtle makeup, nothing obvious, but I felt the change in the mirror. I stopped avoiding eye contact. I stopped sitting in corners. I stopped pretending I didn't want to be noticed. One afternoon, we were walking through campus after a long discussion about identity and how people construct it to survive. He said something like, "You wear armor so well, sometimes I wonder if you remember how to feel without it." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He looked at me in that way again, steady, kind, quiet, and asked, "Would it scare you if I told you I want to know the version of you that exists when you're not protecting yourself?" It did scare me. It terrified me. But I also wanted that. Not just to be known, but to be understood. I hadn't let anyone that close in years, maybe ever. We started texting every day. Nothing dramatic. Just small things. A photo of his coffee with a joke about how it tasted like cardboard. A quote from a book we'd argued about. A picture of his dog curled up under his desk. I found myself checking my phone more often than I wanted to admit. The first time he touched me was accidental. Our fingers brushed when he handed me a pencil, and I flinched without meaning to. He noticed, but didn't comment. Just placed it on the table instead and kept talking like nothing happened. That small gesture, his restraint, meant more to me than anything anyone had ever said. I started to think, maybe I was wrong about people, about men, about what I deserved. One rainy afternoon, we sat in the campus cafe for hours, thunder in the distance, soft music playing. He leaned forward at one point and said, "I've been wanting to ask you something, and I don't want you to feel pressured." I nodded, heart already too loud in my chest. He hesitated. "Would you consider seeing me in a different context? Off campus. Just us." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't dramatic. Just a gentle question. I looked at him and tried to find the catch, the hesitation, the flicker of falsehood. But it wasn't there. He was just looking at me, waiting. I said yes. We didn't make a big deal out of it. No fancy dinner. No flowers. Just a quiet evening at a small Italian place off campus. We split a bottle of wine. Talked about our families, though I carefully avoided most of mine. He shared stories about growing up near the coast. His father was a mechanic, his mother a teacher. Normal, uneventful. It made me feel oddly safe. At the end of the night, he walked me home. Stopped at the gate and didn't ask to come in. Just smiled and said, "I had a good time." I nodded. Me too. That was all. But something shifted after that. The way he looked at me softened. The way I spoke to him grew braver. I started telling him things I hadn't said out loud before. About how I used to avoid mirrors, about the sister-shaped shadow I lived under, about the silence that followed me from room to room when no one knew what to say in my presence. He never pitied me, never tried to fix me, just listened, and when I'd fall quiet, he'd fill the space with something calm, something neutral, so I wouldn't feel like I had to perform. I began to let myself believe it. One evening, we sat on a bench near the science building after a late lecture. The campus was mostly empty, lights flickering through the trees. My hands were cold, but I didn't want to go inside yet. He looked over and said, "You know, you've become my favorite part of this place." I blinked, unsure how to respond. I hadn't prepared for that kind of sincerity. He continued, "You don't have to say anything. I just thought you should hear it, in case you're still waiting for the moment I change my mind. I won't." That night, I cried when I got back to my room. Not because I was sad, not because I was overwhelmed, but because, for the first time in my life, someone had chosen me, and no one had taken it away yet. It was a feeling I didn't know what to do with. Hope. I carried it like something fragile, protected it like it might vanish if I moved too fast. And every time he looked at me, every time he said something that made me feel like I mattered, that hope grew a little more. I didn't realize I was building my world around it, and that I was building it on a lie. It was supposed to be a quiet night. We had agreed to meet at his apartment, something we hadn't done before. Up until then, everything between us had happened in cafes, campus hallways, benches under trees, public spaces, safe ones, but he'd suggested cooking dinner together, and for the first time, I didn't hesitate. The door was already slightly open when I arrived. He appeared in the kitchen entryway with a calm smile, wearing a gray apron stained with sauce. It looked like something out of a low-budget romance movie. A decent guy, making pasta, saving a seat at the table. I dropped my backpack near the couch and stepped inside. "Wine?" he asked. "Just a little," I said, trying to smile without looking nervous. We talked about small things while he stirred the pot. TV shows, books, some new faculty project. I was paying attention, but something felt off. There was a tension in the air. He looked different tonight, measured. His words came slower than usual. The silences between them stretched just a little too long. By the time we sat down to eat, he put down his fork and looked straight at me, not distracted, not playful, like he'd rehearsed what he was about to say. "There's something I need to tell you." My whole body tensed. "Okay, before you assume the worst," he said, "I want you to hear all of it." I nodded, swallowing hard. He folded his arms across the table, exhaled, and said carefully, "This might sound unexpected, but I want to be honest with you." Silence. "I've been with your sister." The words hung in the air like smoke. At first, they didn't register. It was like they passed through me without touching. I blinked, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a joke. But he didn't. "What do you mean you've been with her?" My voice was quieter than I meant it to be. "Before I met you," he said. "And also after. A few times. But, I snapped, already feeling the weight in my chest. "She knew about you. And I thought, maybe it was something we could talk about. Something we could navigate together. Honestly." The room felt smaller, tighter. "You're telling me you're sleeping with my sister and want to keep seeing me?" "Not exactly," he said. "What I'm saying is, the connection we have doesn't erase the one I have with her. In fact, she's open to it. She said she wouldn't mind, that it could even be interesting if we talked about something shared, something equal." The world tilted. "This is insane," I said. He didn't flinch. He didn't laugh. He just looked at me like I was missing the point. "It's not betrayal," he said calmly. "It's about transparency, about maturity. I wanted to be open about it. I thought you'd appreciate that." "You thought I'd appreciate this?" My voice cracked. "You thought I'd be flattered that you want both of us at the same time?" "I thought you might be different," he said. And that was it. The final blow. That maybe you weren't afraid of new dynamics, that you'd see the value in not limiting connection to just one path. "You know what I see?" I said, standing so fast the chair scraped the floor. "I see someone who thinks he's enlightened, when really, you're just another coward who fell for her smile. Just like everyone else." He didn't speak. Maybe he knew I was right. Maybe there was nothing left to defend. I grabbed my bag without another word. My hands were shaking, my throat was tight. I had to get out before I screamed, before I cried, before I broke something that couldn't be undone. The air outside was cold and sharp. I walked aimlessly for blocks, my boots hitting the pavement too hard. My stomach churned. My mouth tasted bitter. But it wasn't just about him. It was her. Of course she knew. Of course she orchestrated this. And of course he thought this was all modern, mature, progressive. He thought he was being ethical. Thought he was starting some kind of honest, boundary-pushing conversation. But she set this up. She took the one thing that felt like mine and turned it into a performance. Again. She knew what he meant to me. And still, she sank her claws in, quietly, smiling, pretending it was all above board. And he followed. Because they always do. She turned the first real connection I ever had into another game. Another trophy. Another win for her side. I wasn't going to let that stand. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my room, back against the door, phone buzzing every few minutes with texts I didn't answer. Him at first, then her. Short ones, measured, designed for control. Can we talk? It's not what you think. I just wanted to be inclusive. I thought you were open-minded. Inclusive. I laughed. A dry, cracked sound. She'd never included me in anything, not once. All she ever did was take, twist, rewrite the story in her favor. And now she was painting herself as generous? No. Not this time. Not again. This time I wouldn't shut down. I wouldn't crawl back into silence and tell myself it didn't matter. I wouldn't hand her another piece of me just because she smiled and called it sharing. I wasn't the girl in the corner anymore. She had no idea what she'd just started. I didn't plan to go. I told myself I'd stay away, keep my distance, pretend none of it mattered. But something broke in me that night. After everything, after years of silence, after finally letting someone in, this was how it ended? I couldn't pretend anymore. By morning, my hands were still shaking. I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten. The ache wasn't just in my chest, it was in my bones. My skin itched with fury, like my body couldn't contain what I felt. I didn't text. I didn't call. I just got dressed, walked out the door, and headed straight to the house I swore I'd never return to. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. Nothing ever felt closed to her. I walked into the living room, heart pounding, fingers curled tight at my sides. She was there, curled up on the couch like nothing had happened, cup of tea in hand, a soft blanket across her lap. She looked up at me like I was unexpected. "Oh," she said, voice light. "Didn't think you'd show up." That smile she wore every time she won. I took a breath, but it came out sharp. "You think this is funny?" She blinked like she didn't understand. "Funny?" "Don't," I warned. "Don't play dumb." "I'm not playing anything," she said, voice coated in innocence. "If you're upset, maybe we should talk calmly, like adults." Calm. She wanted me calm. You manipulated him. You manipulated me. Again. She sat up straighter, the softness fading. "No one manipulated you. He came to me. I just didn't say no." "You knew," I said, stepping forward. "You knew I liked him, that I was with him." "I didn't know it was serious," she said quickly. "You barely told anyone. How was I supposed to know?" "You've always known," I snapped. "Every time. You just didn't care." "Wow." She leaned back against the cushions, tilting her head. "Still holding on to this victim complex, huh?" And that was it. My body moved before I could stop it. The sound of the slap echoed through the room like glass shattering. She gasped. Her hand flew to her cheek, more from shock than pain. Tears welled instantly. Of course they did. She always cried on cue. "You hit me?" Her voice cracked like she couldn't believe I'd ruined the performance. Footsteps pounded down the hallway. Our mother entered first, then our father, both in sleep clothes, alarmed by the noise. "What's going on?" she asked, eyes darting between us. "She hit me," my sister said, voice trembling perfectly. "Out of nowhere. I was just trying to talk." "Out of nowhere?" I laughed. "Tell them what you did. Tell them how you slept with someone you knew I was seeing. Tell them how you pretended to support me just so you could steal him." Our father stepped forward, stern. "That's enough." I turned to him. "No, it's not enough. It's never enough. I've spent my whole life being quiet so she could shine. So you could be proud of her while I disappeared." "Where is this coming from?" he snapped. "Because of a boy?" "It's not just a boy," I shouted. "It's every single time she took something that was mine. Every look, every compliment, Every second I was invisible, so she could be your golden child. She didn't take anything from you, our mother said. If people chose her, that's not her fault. Don't blame your sister for your bitterness. My breath caught in my throat. Bitterness. That's all they saw in me. She plays innocent, I said, quieter now. But you don't see it, do you? You never have. Because you've already decided who the good daughter is. She's crying, our mother said, kneeling by her like she was 5 years old. You need help. You're not well. I laughed again. It sounded wrong, hysterical. I'm not well because I finally fought back? My sister didn't say a word. She just looked at me, eyes wide and red, lower lip trembling slightly. She was perfect at it. The wounded angel, the wronged sister, the quiet hero in the family's tragedy. And me, the crazy one, the unstable one, the girl who never got over high school jealousy. You should go, our father said. His voice wasn't angry, just tired, detached, like he was done sorting out my messes. I stood there for a moment, taking it in. They weren't going to ask what really happened. They weren't going to listen. They never had. I wasn't their daughter. I was a footnote in her story. I turned to leave. Don't come back until you've fixed whatever's wrong inside you, our mother added. I stopped in the doorway. What's wrong inside me, I said slowly, is that I spent my whole life trying to earn love you handed to her for free. No one answered. I stepped outside, into the cold, leaving the door wide open behind me. My hands still stung. My heart felt bruised. But for the first time, I wasn't sorry. They could keep her. I was done begging to be seen. I left with nothing. Not a bag, not a plan, just the clothes I was wearing and a phone at 12% battery. I didn't cry. Not on the walk back. Not when I passed familiar streets that once felt like home. Not even when I reached campus and realized I had nowhere to go. There's a kind of numbness that settles after the last thread snaps. It's not peace. It's emptiness, but at least it's mine. I stayed the first night on a bench behind the library, curled up in my coat, pretending I was just resting between study sessions. No one noticed. People rarely do. The next morning, I sent an email to the housing office saying there had been a family issue and I needed emergency placement. I didn't go into details. I didn't need to. They offered a single dorm room that had just been vacated, tiny, drafty, and right next to the communal bathroom. It was perfect. I moved in without ceremony. One backpack, a charger, and the same clothes from the day before. The room had a bed with a thin mattress, a desk scarred with pen marks, and a window with no view. But the door locked. No one could walk in uninvited. No one could take anything from me. I got a second job, then a third. Between tutoring sessions and late-night shifts shelving books, I barely had time to think. That was the point. The less I thought, the less it hurt. The days blurred. I'd wake before sunrise, study while eating cold instant oats, attend classes, work, read, write, then collapse into bed for 3 or 4 hours before doing it all over again. I lived off coffee and adrenaline. The exhaustion was a kind of comfort. It kept the noise in my head at bay. People around me started noticing. Professors praised my focus. Classmates called me driven. They didn't know it was survival. That every paper I submitted was written through the fog of memory. That every A was a scream they couldn't hear. My phone stayed mostly silent. I stopped looking for messages. Stopped expecting them. My sister didn't reach out. Neither did my parents. I didn't know if they even noticed how long I'd been gone. If they cared. If they told people I was going through something, the way people do when they don't want to admit the truth. I told no one what had happened. Not about him. Not about her. Not about the slap or the way my mother looked at me like I was a stranger. It stayed locked inside, tightening into something small and sharp, like glass under the skin. Every time I wanted to fall apart, I remembered that moment in the doorway, when they told me to leave, when she cried, and they comforted her, when no one asked what I'd been through. That memory became fuel. I applied for a research assistant position no one thought I'd get. I got it. I applied for scholarships I didn't think I qualified for. I got those too. Each win felt like a quiet act of defiance. I didn't post about it. Didn't tell anyone. I just kept stacking my accomplishments like bricks in a wall, not to show off, but to protect myself, to build something no one could touch. I didn't date, I didn't flirt, I avoided parties, I declined invitations to study groups unless absolutely necessary. People called me intimidating, intense, focused. I let them. Better to be alone by choice than risk being discarded again. Sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake and let myself remember. His eyes when he said, "It's not betrayal." Her voice calling me bitter. My father telling me to go. My mother's back as I walked out. And then I'd get up, make tea, open a textbook, and keep going. It wasn't healing. I wasn't moving on, but I was moving forward. One page at a time. One shift at a time. One small, stubborn breath at a time. I found a cheap off-campus apartment during summer break. The building was old, the water pressure was terrible, and the heater made noises like it was choking. But it was mine. I paid for it with my own money. I signed the lease alone. The first night there, I sat on the floor with a microwaved burrito and looked around at the bare walls. No decorations, no photos, just silence. It was the best silence I'd ever known. No one asking what was wrong. No one looking past me. No one pretending I was crazy. Just me, in a space I'd built for myself. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel happy. But I felt steady. And after everything, that was enough. Because they'd taken so much. But they couldn't take this. I hadn't seen her in almost 3 years. Not in person. Not without a screen between us, or the forced presence of others. We existed in separate orbits now. Mine quiet, self-built, invisible by choice. Hers still bright, still curated, but flickering more than before. The invitation came from our mother. A text, short and impossible to misread. Family dinner next Sunday. She'll be there too. I expect you to come. I almost deleted it, but something in me hesitated. Not out of guilt, that had died long ago, but out of curiosity. What did family dinner mean now? What did she look like without her usual spotlight? I went, dressed in something neutral, nothing flashy, nothing desperate, my hair tied back, no makeup. I didn't want compliments. I wanted to observe. The house looked the same. Beige walls, framed photos where her smile got bigger every year while mine stayed the same size or vanished altogether. Our mother opened the door, offered a polite smile, not a hug. Our father muttered something about how long it's been, then returned to his phone. She wasn't there yet. I helped set the table. They didn't ask about my job, my apartment, or my degree. Not that I expected them to. They still spoke about her like she was the crown jewel of the family. So strong, such a survivor, so brave to keep going. They didn't say it out loud, but I heard it in the pauses. Unlike you. The door opened 15 minutes late. She walked in like nothing had ever happened, like there'd never been betrayal, tears, or a slap that shattered everything. Her hair was lighter now, shoulder length, her body thinner. She moved differently, slower, like someone who wasn't sure the floor would hold. But her smile hadn't changed. On her arm was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, salt and pepper hair, a gold watch too shiny for the setting. He wore confidence like cologne, thick, artificial, designed to cover something else. She introduced him as someone special. His name barely registered. I was too focused on his face, because I knew it. Years ago, during a conference mixer at the university, he'd cornered me near the bar, complimented my voice, asked where I was from, said I had an energy, the kind of line meant to sound profound but reeked of practiced flattery. When I told him I was a student, his interest cooled, but he lingered long enough to make me uncomfortable. I'd remembered his eyes, gray but not soft, strategic. He never realized who I was, never asked my name. And now he was dating my sister. She clung to his arm as if he were proof of something. She laughed too loud at his jokes, touched his shoulder during stories no one had asked to hear. Our parents beamed. He was successful, cultured, older. Exactly what she needs, my mother whispered as if it were profound. I watched in silence, eating slowly. He glanced at me once, then again. The second look a fraction too long. I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. Not of who I was, but what I was. Prey, maybe. Or opportunity. He didn't remember where he'd seen me. Just that he had. That's when it started. Not the anger, not the sadness, something colder. There was no rage in me that night. No tears, no trembling hands. Just a single, still thought, sharp as a blade. She's doing it again. Taking up space she didn't earn. Parading someone who wasn't what he seemed. Rewriting her chaos as triumph. But this time, I wasn't a spectator. This time, I wasn't 15, crying into a pillow while the world cheered for her. I wasn't the invisible one. I wasn't the victim. I looked at him, long enough to make sure he felt it. His gaze shifted, unsure. I let the corner of my mouth lift. Not a smile, just a signal. A flicker of control. His eyes darkened. Good. After dinner, I helped clear the table while she showed my mother a photo album on her phone, mostly pictures of herself and him at vineyards, rooftop bars, expensive brunches, a life built for appearance. I heard her say, "He's everything I've been waiting for," and I almost laughed. I left early. No goodbyes, but the image stayed with me. Her, wrapped around another man like armor, presenting him to the family like he was her prize. And maybe he was, but I knew something she didn't. I knew he'd already tried to taste me. I knew he'd crossed a line once, before names, before ties, and I knew that kind of man didn't stop looking when he already had what he wanted. She thought he was her new beginning, but he was going to be my ending. Not because I loved him, not because I wanted to take something from her, but because she needed to feel what it was like to lose. Not by accident, by design. He made it easy. It didn't take much. A smile, a pause in conversation, a slightly longer glance than necessary. I didn't touch him first. I didn't even pretend to flirt. I just let him think it was his idea. Men like him want to believe they're in control, that they're irresistible, that the younger woman at the table can't possibly be immune to their charm. He mistook my silence for shyness, my restraint for fascination. It took 3 days. He messaged me first. Found my number through a mutual contact he just happened to run into. His opening line was lazy, something about how I'd looked interesting at dinner. I waited a day before answering, kept it cool, short, polite, enough to bait the hook without making the line too tight. He bit. We met the following week for drinks. Something casual, somewhere no one would see. I chose the place. Dimly lit. Off campus. Neutral. He arrived early. I arrived later. I didn't dress to impress. I didn't need to. He was already convinced I wanted him. The conversation was forgettable. He talked about money, projects, his gym routine. Men like him think you're impressed just because they showed up. I smiled when he paused, nodded when he bragged. He didn't notice how little I spoke. Halfway through the second drink, he leaned in and said, "You know, I didn't expect you to say yes." "I didn't say yes," I replied. "I said maybe." He laughed, called me dangerous. He had no idea. That night, we didn't sleep together. I let him walk me to my car, let his hand hover at my lower back, let him kiss my cheek too slowly. I stepped back before he could try for more. Told him I had early meetings. He texted before I even turned the ignition. 2 nights later, I invited him over. My apartment was clean, no distractions, 1 candle, low music, nothing romantic, just quiet enough for every movement to feel intentional. He brought a bottle of wine I didn't open, said something about how he shouldn't be here, and smiled like it was a compliment. I didn't answer. I stepped closer, let him touch my arm, let him kiss me like he thought he'd won something. We ended up in my bedroom. Clothes came off quickly, awkwardly. There was no passion, no heat, just noise, skin, movement. At some point, he reached for his phone, probably to silence it. That's when I reached for mine. The photo wasn't rushed. I waited until he was asleep, his arm still draped over my waist like possession. My expression was blank, deliberate. The light was soft, enough to see everything, enough to leave nothing to interpretation. I took 2 shots, one from above, one from the mirror. I stared at them for a long time. Then I got up, showered, dressed, made coffee. He didn't wake until I placed a mug on the nightstand. "You're intense," he said, groggy, smiling like he thought this would be a secret. "It's just coffee," I said. He left 20 minutes later. Promised to text, said he wanted to see me again. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my photos, selected the best one, cropped it slightly, just enough to keep it tasteful, just enough to make it worse. Then I opened our last message thread. I hadn't texted her in years. No greeting, no explanation, just the image. Sent. I turned my phone face down and waited. It took less than 5 minutes. She called. I declined. She called again. I let it ring. Then came the messages. Fast, frantic. "What the fuck is wrong with you? Why would you do this? Are you insane? You planned this. You're disgusting." I read every one, then turned off notifications. No reply. She needed to feel it. That silence. That helplessness. That moment when the floor disappears and the world keeps spinning like nothing happened. The exact moment I'd lived through too many times. She didn't deserve answers. She'd spent a lifetime taking what was mine. My crushes, my confidence, my place in the family, my voice. And every time she'd smiled like it wasn't her fault, like the universe just favored her. Now she'd know what it felt like to be disposable. Not just forgotten, replaced. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. There was no adrenaline rush, no sense of triumph, just stillness. A calm that came from knowing finally that I wasn't the one bleeding this time. I was the one holding the knife. The photo burned through everything. By the time morning came, the silence had collapsed into chaos. Group chats, DMs, screenshots flying between friends, family, co-workers, all attached to one photo and one question. Is this real? She tried to control it, claimed it was edited, then said it was from before they got serious. Then said I was obsessed, that I'd always had problems, that she had tried to love me but I'd never let her. But no one bought it, not this time. He disappeared almost immediately, went dark on social media, blocked her, blocked me, sent one pathetic message before vanishing. This got out of hand. Coward. I didn't respond, not to anyone. No defense, no confession, no explanation. The truth didn't need backup. She broke first. It was her pride. She couldn't stand that people were whispering about her instead of admiring. She'd spent years building a version of herself that could survive anything. But shame doesn't respect reputation. 3 days later, she found me. I was sitting outside a cafe, alone, reviewing some files for work. I heard the heels first, sharp, angry taps against the pavement. I didn't look up, not even when she stopped in front of me, shaking. "You think this is funny?" She spat. I closed my folder, slowly, looked at her. No emotion. "I think it's overdue." Her face twisted. "You ruined me." "No," I said. "You did that yourself." She looked thinner, messy hair, eyes rimmed red. She'd lost sleep and control. "You planned this," she hissed. "You waited. You knew exactly what you were doing." I tilted my head. "So do you." "You're disgusting." "No, I'm finally even." She laughed once, high and bitter. "You think people admire you for this? You think they're on your side? They're just watching the car crash." I shrugged. "Let them. You seduced him. He chased me, just like every other one you stole." She flinched. "You think this makes you powerful?" she asked. "You think it erases everything?" "I don't want to erase it," I said. "I want you to live with it." A few people were watching now, not openly, just enough to let her know she wasn't invisible anymore. She dropped her voice, furious. "You've always been jealous. Always. It's pathetic." I stared at her, really stared. "You spent years taking what was mine, laughing while I disappeared. This wasn't about jealousy." "Then what was it about?" she snapped. I stood, slow and steady. "It was about showing you what it feels like, to be powerless, to be humiliated, to be discarded." "You're sick," she whispered. I smiled. "You want to know the truth?" I asked. "Nothing, and I mean nothing, in my entire life was as delicious as seeing that rage on your face, the same rage you caused in me over and over again." She stood frozen, lips parted, breath shallow. "But," I added, stepping closer, lowering my voice to a blade, "there was actually one thing even sweeter than that." She didn't move. Her eyes searched mine, hoping to find hesitation. "Your boyfriend." I leaned in. "He was even more delicious than your pain." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. And in that silence, everything she'd ever used, her face, her charm, her ability to twist herself into the victim, crumbled. The girl who always won had finally been outplayed. "I hate you," she whispered. I smiled wider. "Now we're even." I picked up my folder, turned, and walked away. She didn't follow. She never would again. It didn't end with applause, no standing ovation, no poetic justice, just silence. After the photo, the confrontation, the collapse, everything settled. Not cleanly, not neatly, but enough. She tried for a while to rebuild her image, posted photos of yoga retreats, brunches with friends, long captions about growth and healing, but the engagement dropped. The invitations stopped. People nodded politely when her name came up, then moved on. There's only so much glitter you can pour over rot before everyone smells it. She changed cities eventually. Rumor was she got a job at some boutique PR agency. Started dating a real estate agent. Bought a dog. Posed like she was happy. But something in her eyes always gave her away. That twitch of desperation behind every smile. The ache of someone who knows the world isn't clapping anymore. She never reached out again. Neither did our parents. After that final dinner, after I shattered their illusion of the perfect daughter, they went quiet. No birthday messages, no check-ins. They picked a side that night, and it wasn't mine. And honestly, that made things easier. I kept going, finished my degree with distinction, took a job offer 2 states away, built a life from the ground up. Not flashy, not loud, but mine. An apartment with a decent view. Weekends where I wasn't bracing for impact. A bank account with money I earned. Quiet mornings, peaceful nights. And him, not the one from before. Not a professor, not some man caught in a web of ego and performance. Just someone kind, steady. Someone who didn't look through me or around me, but directly at me. Who never asked about my sister. Who never needed a version of me that fit into someone else's shadow. It took me months to let him in, years to believe I was allowed to be loved, but I never gave him the broken pieces to fix. I handed him the whole version, the one I built myself. Sometimes people ask if I ever talked to her again, if we made peace, if we forgave. I tell them the truth. No, we didn't. She never apologized, never admitted what she did, and I never asked her to. Forgiveness is overrated when it's demanded. I didn't need closure from her. I needed freedom from her. And I got that. As for him, the man she thought would be her new beginning, no one really knows where he ended up. A new city. A new woman, probably. People like him always land somewhere. But he's a footnote now. A tool that served its purpose. I don't think about him. Not even when I see men with the same cologne. Not even when someone says his name. He was never the point. She was. Or maybe, I was. The version of me that finally stopped asking for room and just took it. The version that chose herself, not out of spite, but survival. Out of clarity. Out of exhaustion. Out of the understanding that some people will only stop hurting you when you stop letting them. I don't regret anything. Not the photo, not the silence, not the look on her face when everything cracked. It wasn't revenge. It was the end of a performance I never auditioned for. I live differently now. Slower, softer sometimes, but firmer too. I don't let people in unless they knock twice. I don't chase anyone who walks away. I don't explain myself to people who decided who I was before I opened my mouth. I don't let anyone call me bitter. I know who I am now. I'm the girl they overlooked, underestimated, blamed. I'm the woman who took the broken parts and built a fortress, and no one takes anything from me anymore.